The Town Without Tomorrow. Chapter 1, The Clock That Stood Still. I don't remember when I arrived in this town. There was no grand entrance, no signs to welcome travelers, and no roads to mark the path. One moment, I was walking beneath the soft, dappled light of an unfamiliar forest, and the next, I stood at the edge of a street paved with cobblestones the color of faded tea. Buildings stretched out before me like whispers from another era, timeless, quiet, and gently breathing in the still air. Above them, the sky hung in a perpetual shade of twilight. Neither day nor night. A warm hush wrapped around everything, as though the world were holding its breath, not out of fear, but out of reverence. There were no clocks ticking. None at all. I noticed it first in the square at the center of town. A tall clock tower stood like a watchful guardian, but its hands were frozen at exactly 7 minutes past 7. The longer I looked at it, the more I began to wonder, was it morning? Evening? Had it always been that time here? When I asked a passerby, a kind-eyed old woman carrying a basket of lemons, she smiled as though I had just complimented her garden. "Oh," she said with a soft chuckle, "we don't mind the hour. Time doesn't move here. It rests." I nodded as if I understood, though I didn't. Not yet. She handed me a lemon, warm from her hand. "You look like someone who's still looking forward," she added. "Give it time. Or rather, let time give itself to you." I carried that lemon with me for the rest of the day, though I couldn't say how long a day really was in this place. The streets wound gently, like paths drawn by memory. Flowers bloomed in every crevice, white ones with silver petals that shimmered as if they were catching moonlight, though no moon had risen. I saw people sitting on benches, reading books with no titles, or humming quiet tunes with no words. They looked content, peaceful in a way I rarely saw in the world I came from. It wasn't that they had forgotten about time. It was more like, they had forgiven it. I wandered into a cafe that stood near a gently babbling stream. There was no door, just an open arch draped with vines. Inside, the air smelled of warm bread and chamomile. A woman behind the counter looked up, gave me a nod, and gestured to a chair. "You're new," she said, as she poured something golden into a small porcelain cup. I took the cup, felt its gentle warmth seep into my fingers. "I think so," I replied. "I don't remember arriving." "That's how most of us come," she said. "Not by decision, but by need." I sipped. The drink tasted like honey and soft rain. "Is this a dream?" I asked, after a pause. "Is a dream something that ends when you open your eyes?" she replied, her gaze steady but kind. "Here, we don't ask whether something is real. We ask whether it is enough." That stayed with me. Whether it is enough. I found a place to stay, a little room above a bookshop that smelled of paper and lavender. There was no lock on the door, no key. Just a simple wooden sign that read, "Come in if your heart is quiet." Each morning, if I could still call it that, I awoke to the same gentle twilight. The town never grew brighter or darker. Shadows remained soft, as if the sun and moon were holding hands just beyond the horizon. I began to walk the streets with no purpose. Not because I was lost, but because this place asked nothing of me. There were no errands to run, no meetings to keep, no goals to chase. Just the steady rhythm of footsteps on cobblestones and the occasional songbird weaving notes into the silence. I asked someone once why the clock tower had stopped. A quiet man with spectacles and a beard that reached his collarbone told me the story. They say the clock stopped the day someone asked what day it was. I waited for more, but he simply smiled and continued dusting the shelves of his antique shop. That evening, if evening it was, I sat by the clock tower and watched the sky for a long time. A small boy came by, dragging a wooden toy duck on a string. "Do you miss tomorrow?" I asked him, without thinking. He looked up at me, his eyes clear and bright. "What's that?" And I didn't know how to explain. That night in the bookshop room, I lay still for what might have been hours or heartbeats. No ticking. No wind against the windowpane. Only the sound of my own breath and the memory of that little boy's question. "What is tomorrow?" I remembered how, in the world I came from, tomorrow was something people chased. They filled it with plans and promises, fears and hopes. They spoke of it as if it owed them something, or as if it could redeem the past. But here, there was no bargaining with what's to come. There was only the now, the warm tea, the quiet sky, the clock that stood still. And slowly, I began to feel it. The soft unwinding of something tight within me. A loosening. A gentle settling of thoughts that had always raced ahead, trying to catch a train that never came. Here, I didn't need to run. There was nowhere to be late to. I folded the blanket over myself and watched the soft glow from the window. Outside, a lamplighter touched each lantern with a stick tipped in quiet fire. The flames didn't flicker. They just glowed. Steady. Content. I thought, maybe I could stay here a little longer. Maybe, in a place without tomorrow, I could finally begin to understand today. And with that, I closed my eyes, not because I was tired, but because I had nothing left to search for. Chapter 2, The Book of Unwritten Days. There's a library near the edge of town, though no one ever calls it that. It stands just beyond a path of velvet grass, where trees curve gently overhead like bowed guardians. The building itself seems to have grown out of the earth rather than been built. Vines cascade down its walls, and soft moss blankets the stone steps that lead to the arched wooden door. No sign, no hours posted, just a simple phrase etched above the entrance: "Here, only the present is written." The first time I stepped inside, the air felt heavier, but not in a burdensome way. It was the kind of weight that comes with quiet, with reverence. The scent of worn pages and candle wax greeted me, along with the faintest sound of rustling, though I saw no one. Shelves lined the walls, each one carved from smooth, pale wood. They reached impossibly high into the arched ceiling, disappearing into a gentle dusk above. No ladders. No order. Books rested not by category or author, but seemingly by feeling. Some shelves held thick tomes with worn spines and faded lettering. Others cradled small, delicate notebooks tied with twine or ribbon. I wandered between them, fingers grazing the edges, feeling a low hum rise up from certain books, like a sigh, or a memory trying to remember itself. I reached for one with a blue velvet cover and opened it. The pages were blank. Another beside it was the same. And another. Some pages shimmered faintly, as if words had once been there and gently faded away. I found a small round table at the center of the room, where a single book waited. This one was different. Its cover was soft as fabric, and when I opened it, words spilled across the page like handwriting, but not mine. The title read, "A Day That Was Almost Forgotten." I read. I walked through the garden where lilies bloom even in twilight. A stranger passed by and asked for directions to the fountain. I gave them none, because there was no fountain, only memory. But they smiled as though they'd found what they were looking for. I returned to my chair beneath the elm and closed my eyes. I turned the page, expecting more. But that was all. No author. No date. Just the warmth of something lived. Not remembered, lived. When I looked up, someone was sitting across from me. I hadn't heard them arrive. He was old, but not frail. His eyes were clouded in a way that suggested depth, like looking through fog at a lake underneath. He wore a gray shawl and smelled faintly of pine and ink. "You found your way to the unwritten section," he said. I tilted my head. "But I've read something." He smiled. "Ah, yes. Some things write themselves the moment they are remembered." I waited. In this town, I'd learned that silence was not something to fill, but something to share. Each of us, he said at last, carries a book of days that never happened. Moments imagined, paths not taken, words never said but often thought. They gather here, not to be read by others, but to be felt. I closed the book gently. So this was mine. Not quite. But maybe something adjacent to you. Close enough to echo. He stood slowly. You may take one with you, if it lets you. But never two. With that, he disappeared into the shelves. I didn't follow. Instead, I walked again among the rows, letting my hand brush over the bindings until something stopped me. A small book bound in soft green fabric, no thicker than a sigh. When I opened it, there was only a single sentence. I didn't look at the stars that night, but I wish I had. I held it to my chest for a while, unsure why my throat tightened just a little. I didn't borrow the book. I didn't have to. It came with me in the space between memory and meaning. Back in my little room above the bookshop, I placed it on the windowsill. It didn't vanish. It didn't fade. It simply rested there, as if it had always been mine. That twilight, like every twilight, I walked again through the town. A girl sat by the fountain that wasn't a fountain, dropping small pebbles into a pool that only she could see. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Counting days," she replied, without looking up. "Which ones?" "The ones that never got counted." Her words reminded me of the book in my hands. "The green one. Can I count with you?" I asked. She nodded, and handed me a smooth, round pebble. We sat side by side, letting the stones fall one by one into invisible water. I didn't need to hear the splash to know it had landed. Later, as I walked home, I began to understand something. The town wasn't afraid of time. It simply didn't require it. It offered a space outside the urgency of minutes and hours, a place where moments could be savored, held, even if they never quite happened. The next morning, or what would have been morning elsewhere, I opened the green book again. A second sentence had appeared. I finally looked at the stars, and they were just as quiet as I'd imagined. No ink, no pen. Just presence. In a world where tomorrow never came, some things still grew. Not through planning or progression, but through presence. Through noticing. And so I sat still, the book in my lap, and watched the light spill gently through the window. No shadows moved. No bells chimed. But I felt full, like something had spoken in a language I almost understood. Maybe tomorrow doesn't need to arrive, I thought. Maybe all it ever asks is that we see today, clearly, gently, completely. And for the first time in a long while, I did. Chapter 3, The Day That Stayed. There was a moment, just after I woke, when I thought perhaps the town had changed. A sliver of golden light stretched across the floor in a way I hadn't seen before. Not brighter, not louder, just different. Subtle, like the breath you take after hearing something beautiful and not knowing why it moved you. I sat up slowly in my little room above the bookshop. The green book rested by the window, exactly where I had left it. But now, a third sentence waited for me. The day didn't pass. It stayed and watched. I ran my fingers over the words. They didn't feel new. They felt remembered, like something I had once dreamed and nearly forgotten. Outside, the town looked the same. The streets still glowed with twilight, the clock tower still pointed to 7 minutes past 7, and the air still carried that tender stillness that always felt like a long exhale. And yet, something had settled. Or perhaps, something had simply revealed itself. That day, I walked without direction again. But this time, the town seemed to follow me, instead of the other way around. The cafe I had visited before had changed. Not in appearance, it still stood open and fragrant, still hummed with the scent of warm bread and golden tea, but the woman who greeted me looked into my eyes as if she'd been expecting me. "You're carrying today," she said with a small smile, handing me a fresh cup. "Be gentle with it." I took a sip, nodding, unsure what she meant but certain it mattered. Outside, a boy sat beneath a tree with a sketchbook in his lap. His pencil moved without urgency, tracing soft lines that never seemed to end. I approached slowly and asked what he was drawing. "Not what I see," he replied. "What sees me?" I didn't ask further. There was no need to understand everything here, only to feel it, like sunlight through a curtain or the hush before rain. I wandered through alleys I hadn't noticed before, past windows that flickered with candlelight though no shadows moved inside. A soft breeze carried the sound of chimes, not ringing but swaying, more like the idea of a chime than the sound itself. That's when I saw the garden. It was nestled between two houses, neither of which I remembered seeing before. The gate stood open, and inside, time had rooted itself in petals and stems. Flowers bloomed in impossible colors, lavender as deep as twilight, gold tinged with mist, blues that seemed to hum softly if I leaned close. A bench stood near the center. I sat. There, everything felt even slower, as if the very air had chosen to rest beside me. Bees moved with grace, not hurry. The grass, kissed by shadow and light, never bent the same way twice. I closed my eyes. And the day stayed. It didn't ask me to move forward. It didn't pull me toward anything. It simply stayed with me, like a companion who didn't speak but understood exactly what I needed to feel. I thought of the world I came from, how days raced, how people lived between things, rushing to arrive somewhere else. There was always a next, the next task, the next meal, the next week, the next version of oneself. Even joy felt temporary there, fragile, always balanced on what came after. But here, nothing chased me. I didn't feel the ache of wasted time, because there was no such thing as waste. Every moment held itself whole. And that wholeness was enough. I opened my eyes and looked around. A soft light filtered through the garden, not growing or fading, just being. I whispered aloud, not to anyone, just to the stillness. "Thank you for staying." Later, back in my room, I returned to the green book. A fourth sentence had appeared. "Some days don't pass, they wait for you to notice them." That evening, I noticed everything. I watched how the baker placed bread in the window one by one, how the steam curled from each loaf like the last sigh of a story. I watched how the lamplighter paused before each lantern, holding a moment in his hand before letting the flame bloom. I watched how the sky never quite darkened but held its own quiet glow, as if promising that the day would not be lost. I sat on the steps of the bookshop and simply stayed. No book, no thoughts of tomorrow or what I should be doing instead. Just the warmth of the stone beneath me and the hush of a town that had made peace with stillness. And in that stillness, I felt myself soften. Not disappear, just loosen. Like a knot being undone by kindness. As the stars began to peek through the twilight veil, I whispered again, not because anyone needed to hear it, but because I did. "This is enough." And the town, in its silence, whispered back. Chapter 4: The House Where Hours Fell Asleep. There is a house near the edge of the lake, where the sky always seems slightly more hushed than anywhere else. I found it by accident, though, in this town, I've begun to wonder if anything is truly accidental. The lake itself is perfectly still. Its surface mirrors the twilight sky so completely that it feels like you're walking beside a second world turned upside down. The house rests on its shore, half covered in ivy, its roof gently bowed as if it were nodding to some forgotten lullaby. A small wooden sign hangs by the front gate, swaying gently without wind. It says, "Where hours go to rest." The first time I stepped inside, the door creaked softly, not out of disrepair, but more like a long-held breath. The air inside was warmer than outside, but not stifling. It held the kind of warmth that comes from well-worn blankets and tea left just long enough to steep. The walls were lined with shelves, not of books, but of glass jars. Each jar was sealed, and inside every one floated a small, glowing orb. Some flickered like candlelight, others pulsed gently as though following a heartbeat. None were labeled. They simply existed. A woman sat in a rocking chair by the window. Her hair was silver, piled high in a loose knot, and her eyes held the color of faded parchment. She didn't speak when I entered, nor did she seem surprised to see me. Instead, she gestured to a second chair beside her. I sat. The rocking continued. Only after several long moments did she speak, softly, like the rustle of pages being turned. Most visitors come here when they've forgotten what it feels like to stop counting. I didn't answer at first. I wasn't sure if I'd been counting, but maybe I had. Somewhere inside, even in this town, maybe some small part of me still tried to measure the immeasurable. "What are these jars?" I asked. She didn't look at them. She kept her eyes on the lake, still as glass outside the window. "They're ours," she said simply. "Moments that chose not to be spent." Chose? Yes, she nodded, as if that were the most natural thing in the world. Some hours don't want to be used. They want to rest. So they come here. I stood slowly and walked toward a shelf. One of the jars pulsed with a gentle pink glow, like the last light of a sun that never quite set. As I reached out, my fingertips tingled, not from heat, but from recognition. I felt it. A memory. Or something close to it. A quiet afternoon with no plans. The sound of distant rain against a window. A cup of something warm in my hands. No urgency, no voice pulling me forward, just time that had curled up beside me and purred. I looked back at the woman. Was this mine? She smiled. Maybe. Or maybe it belonged to someone like you. Can I take it? She shook her head gently. No one takes time from here. But you can sit with it. And so I did. I held the jar in my hands, not to keep it, but to be near it. I sat on the floor, cross-legged, the way children do when they feel safe. The hour within the glass pulsed slowly, and with each glow, I felt more still. No pressure to speak. No need to do anything. Just the slow, steady breath of a moment that didn't ask to become anything more than itself. After what felt like a very long time, or no time at all, I placed the jar back on the shelf. The woman watched me, her eyes soft. "You carry time differently now," she said. "I think," I said slowly, "I've stopped asking it to hurry." She nodded, and we sat together again in silence, the rocking chair whispering its rhythm against the wooden floor. On my way out, I paused at the doorway. "Why do the hours come here?" I asked. She smiled, not at me, but at the lake. "Because they know they'll be safe. And seen." I walked back along the path that hugged the lake, my footsteps leaving no mark. I didn't look back, because I didn't need to. The house would always be there, not as a place, but as a feeling. That night, in my room above the bookshop, I opened the green book again. Another line had appeared. The hour I never spent still waited for me, and I sat beside it until it forgave me. I ran my hand over the page and closed the book softly. Through the window, the stars blinked slowly, not hurried, not afraid of fading. I breathed in. The day didn't end. It simply folded itself around me, like a gentle blanket. And in the quiet, I whispered a thank you, not to the woman, not to the house, but to time itself. Chapter 5: The Garden Where Names Are Planted. There's a path behind the clock tower that I hadn't noticed before. It's narrow, almost shy, hidden between an overgrown hedge and a low stone wall. The first time I saw it, I wasn't even looking for it. I was simply tracing the curve of the square, letting my fingers brush against the cool stone, when a gentle breeze guided my gaze just so, and there it was. The path wound quietly between trees that bent inwards like old friends whispering secrets. Leaves overhead created a ceiling of soft green and pale gold, and beneath my feet, the ground felt warm, alive, even. After some time, minutes or hours, I can never be sure, I came upon a gate made of woven branches. It wasn't locked. In this town, nothing ever is. There was only a sign carved into the archway. "Welcome, if you remember your name." I hesitated. Not because I had forgotten my name exactly, but because, here, names seemed less important. No one had ever asked me mine. And I had never asked for theirs. We had spoken without needing labels. Without needing to define. Still, I stepped through. The garden beyond was unlike anything I'd seen before. Not wild, not tame, just deeply, quietly alive. Flowers grew in soft spirals, their colors shifting gently as if in conversation with the breeze. Vines crept along arched trellises made of driftwood, and trees bore leaves shaped like feathers, letters, lanterns. And everywhere, tucked between petals, hanging from branches, nestled in the roots, were names. Some were carved into smooth stones. Others inked onto slips of parchment, gently swaying from silver threads. A few were sung by the wind itself, whispered softly as though the garden was reading aloud from an old, beloved book. I wandered slowly, my heart moving more carefully than my feet. Everywhere I looked, I saw names I didn't recognize. But they felt familiar. Like echoes of people I hadn't met yet, or versions of myself I had left behind in moments too small to remember. I came to a tree with bark the color of deep dusk. At its base sat a bench made of soft moss, and beside it, a small table. On the table lay a wooden box. The lid opened easily. Inside were small slips of paper, blank, except for a single question printed faintly across the top. Who are you when no one is watching? I sat there for a long time. At first, I thought I needed to come up with an answer. Something poetic, something true. But the longer I sat, the more I realized the garden wasn't waiting for an answer. It was offering a question as a gift, not to solve, but to carry. I picked up a slip of paper and simply wrote my name. Not the name I was born with, but the name that had been echoing gently within me since I arrived in this town. Not a word, but a feeling. I folded the paper and placed it in a small hollow within the tree. The bark seemed to glow softly, not in response, but in acknowledgement. When I stood again, I felt lighter. I continued walking and came across others like me, not people, exactly, but presences. A sense of someone having once stood there, once planted a name, once whispered a part of themselves into the soil. And the garden had listened. Before I left, I found a flower unlike the others, small, pale blue, with petals shaped like question marks. I knelt beside it. A tag beside the stem read, "For the names you haven't discovered yet." I smiled. Because I understood. We are always becoming. Always unfolding. Always planting versions of ourselves in quiet places, hoping one day to return and find them blooming. That evening, back in my room, I opened the green book. A new line had appeared, written as though it had always been there. I wrote my name into the soil, and the earth whispered it back with a kindness I hadn't known I needed. I closed the book and looked out the window. The stars were patient tonight. Not watching me. Simply being. And for once, that was enough. Chapter 6, The Bridge Made of Stillness. There is a place in this town that no one ever speaks of, but everyone seems to know. They don't point it out. They don't offer directions. But now and then, someone's gaze will drift just slightly beyond you, as if they're listening to something you can't yet hear. And when that happens, when the quiet folds itself in a particular way, you find it. I found it not by walking, but by standing still. I had risen early, or what passes for early here, and stepped outside, drawn by nothing more than a soft pull inside my chest. I didn't follow any road or choose any direction. I simply stood until the hush of morning wrapped around me completely. And there it was. A narrow bridge, hidden between the trees just beyond the lake. It stretched across a stream so clear, it mirrored the sky with perfect gentleness. But it wasn't the water that caught my breath. It was the bridge itself. It was made entirely of silence. Not stone, not wood, something quieter. Something softer. It shimmered faintly in the light, not glowing, but resting. Waiting. It wasn't invisible, but it didn't ask to be seen. As I stepped onto it, the air changed. The usual sounds of the town, the distant flutter of leaves, the soft steps of cats along windowsills, the hum of tea being poured, vanished. Not abruptly, but gently. As if they had chosen to step aside so something deeper could be heard. I walked slowly, each footstep weightless, as though the bridge held not just my body, but my thoughts. At the center of the bridge, I paused. Not because I meant to, but because it asked me to. Here, there was no forward or backward. No destination. Only stillness. Deep and whole. I had nothing to do. No one to become. Just the present, quiet and vast. And in that stillness, something happened. I began to remember. Not memories in the usual sense. Not events or timelines. But feelings. Sensations. The soft press of a mother's hand on my forehead. The thrill of holding a secret. The comfort of a song hummed out of tune but full of meaning. The ache of missing something before you ever knew what it was. They arrived not as images, but as textures. As tones. And then, just as quietly, they passed. I breathed. And the bridge breathed with me. I realized, then, that this town had never been about forgetting time, but about remembering how to be inside of it. Not above it. Not racing it. Not regretting it. Just living within it, like the way you live inside music without needing to control the notes. As I stood there, I felt something settle behind my eyes. A stillness that didn't feel like silence, but peace. It was then that I noticed something tucked just at the edge of the bridge, a stone, smooth and flat, with a message etched in handwriting so delicate it felt like a whisper. This moment was never lost. Only waiting for you to arrive. I touched the stone lightly, and for a moment, I felt the bridge pulse beneath me, not a sound, not a tremble, but something deeper. An acknowledgement. And then I stepped off the bridge. The sounds of the town returned like birdsong after a long rain. Familiar, gentle, unchanged. But I had changed. Not in any visible way. Not in a way anyone would notice. But inside, something had softened. Something had quieted. The rush, the ache, the reaching, had all been replaced by presence. I walked back through the twilight toward the bookshop. The streets welcomed me like they always had. A child offered me a handful of wildflowers. A cat brushed against my leg. A woman waved from her window, her hand slow and kind. I reached my room and opened the green book. One final sentence waited for me. The bridge didn't lead anywhere. It only showed me that I had already arrived. I closed the book. I didn't place it back on the windowsill. I didn't need to. It had become a part of me. That night, if night it was, I sat in the quiet and listened to the world breathe. I didn't wonder what tomorrow would bring. Because here, in this town without tomorrow, today had become enough. And so I stayed,